Hi, everyone. Welcome to the end of our CEO series. And today I'm very excited to be chatting with Arise, the leadership at Arise. I'll let them introduce themselves and we'll go ahead and get started.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's really nice to see y'all. My name is Amanda D'Ambra, pronoun she, her. I am a co-founder and CEO of Arise.
And hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Erikka Dzirasa, pronouns she, her, and I am the Chief Medical Officer of Arise.
All right. And I'm Jacqueline. I'm the Executive Director of Therapists in Tech. My pronouns are she, her. And I am so excited to have this conversation today about really just market fit and just finding the right clinical voice for your digital mental health program. And I cannot wait to hear the story about Arise and how you all got started and how we got here today. So take it away.
Thank you so much. Yeah, there's so much we can share here. And I will say, as co-founder of Arise, one of the greatest joys has been or if not the greatest joy, has been bringing together this really incredible team that we have. And that team really started with meeting Erikka and just feeling just how much alignment there was, and all the ways which we'll get into in which we together aim to build Arise. But before we get into that, just to share a little bit about our backgrounds, we can just tell you a bit about us and how we came together to found Arise. Arise is delivering virtual care for eating disorders and co-occurring mental health conditions. Really, what we're building is really comprehensive care and putting all of the different pieces together that are needed for the complexity of eating disorders. And also, have really, from the beginning, really committed to doing so in a way that centers the experiences of those who have been historically underserved, both societally and then certainly in the eating disorder space as well. So I'll share too, as it's germane to this conversation, Arise came out of, Joan is my co-founder, and we both have extensive lived experience with eating disorders and mental health needs ourselves. So we've been through all different types of care, and we really wanted to be sure that as we came together to build Rise, neither of us are clinicians. And so we needed to make sure that we really had that clinical foundation and that we were really prioritizing that from the very beginning. And so we were so fortunate that we were able to meet Erikka, which Erikka can share a little bit about that story. I think really meeting Erikka and also convening our care advisory board was the starting point for all of that. So I'll let Erikka share a little bit about her background and of course the story of how we came together as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Amanda. And thank you, Jacqueline, and everyone for having us here today. It's truly an honor. So my name is Erikka Dzirasa. I am a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist, and went to undergrad at Spelman College and then went to Duke, where I did pretty much all of my medical training. And during my residency program, once I decided I was going into child psychiatry, I was offered to do an eating disorders rotation, and I just thought, yeah, I have to know this if I'm going to be a child psychiatrist. But I have to say, I realized that I had a lot of my own personal biases when I went into that field. And it really opened up my eyes to learn that eating disorders impact all bodies. They do not discriminate whatsoever. So shortly after my training, I worked at Duke, where I was a primary psychiatrist there, working at the counseling and psychological services on campus. And I worked with their eating disorder team for a couple of years before I ended up going to Veritas Collaborative, where I served as the medical director of their child and adolescent hospital. And then I went on to start a group practice with two of my colleagues who also have expertise in treatment of eating disorders. And we started a private practice here in Durham, North Carolina. And then in 2020, I ended up joining the board of directors of Project Heal. And Project Heal is really dear to me. It's a nonprofit that really is dedicated to breaking down stigma, but also breaking down healthcare, financial barriers to accessing quality eating disorder treatment. And during my time on the board of directors, I met Joan, and Joan also serves on the board of directors. And she and I were just chatting one day. She's telling me about this amazing person she met, Amanda, and how they're starting their own company called Arise. And when they told me about the mission and the vision, it was very much in alignment with all the things that are really important to me in alignment with my career thus far. So she said, I think you should really meet Amanda. I think you would really connect with her. She could tell you a little bit more about Arise. She's going to be in North Carolina. I think you should meet with her. And I said, okay, well, Joan's from Texas, so she doesn't know that North Carolina. She probably has no idea where. And lo and behold, Amanda's in Durham, and that's where I am. So we met literally that week, and we chatted, and I was able to learn more about her heart for the company. And for me, it's like when there's alignment and values, you can't really shake that. And there's just something about, their mission and serving people who typically are overlooked in the eating disorder field, and really being committed to building a team that represents those that we're trying to serve. So for me, it was just like a no-brainer. And I walked away partially from my private practice. So I still do see some patients on the side, but I decided, I really wanted to join forces with Amanda and Joan because this was definitely bigger than me. And I really am excited about the work. So that's a long introduction.
But it's, I think, Erikka, like that moment for me was so pivotal because as a founder, as a CEO, like so much of my role I see as just how can we convene really incredible folks who bring different perspectives and experiences and ideas and all of the different experiences that you bring. And I don't just mean professionally, I mean, of course, where you've been in your own life too. And how do we bring that forward in building this really important thing that's going to tackle this huge mission that we have? And so part of what Joan and I thought about from the beginning too was, we really wanted to make sure, look, like I said, we are co-founders who are not clinicians. And so it was really important that that be core to the foundation and really a part of our leadership team, that we bring on a chief medical officer who was similarly aligned. And that was true in terms of the type of care that we delivered, but we also felt very strongly about that in terms of culture and team, because, my background is in digital health. I've been in this space for a while, and I think we've seen where that can go really wrong if there's misalignment between the kind of business side and the clinical side, and seeing those as like two separate sides of the organization. So we really wanted somebody with whom we felt that resonance, and that we were going to be able to really build this together and to have that connection, even at a personal level. That was going to be a really strong foundation for us to come together. So we could get more into that, but like from the very beginning, that was always really important to us, is that of course we need to have alignment on the model and how we think about what is the innovation we're going to have in this space, but also really importantly, how do we think about building a team together and the culture and what this is going to feel like. I'll also say one of the very first things that we did, which I think is so important for a lot of digital health companies, attempt to do this or do this like kind of in like a light way. And I don't think they meaningfully engage with advisory boards. So in fact, so all of these folks that you see here, we've been so fortunate that they were willing to come together with us and lend their expertise and perspective, both as humans, some of them with lived experience with eating disorders, some of them with lived experience with other aspects of what we're building in terms of identity in the communities that we serve, and of course, their expertise across the eating disorder fields and mental health fields. And so actually, before we had built anything at all for Arise, we convened this advisory board. Joan and I spent the first few months together ideating, doing user research, and really spending a lot of time with these folks and a bunch of other folks in the community, in the eating disorder community, just listening and learning and understanding from these folks, from Erikka, from others, what are the gaps? What is really missing in the space? What are you all seeing that if you could practice in the way that you wanted to, if you could build this like dream model, like what would it be like in order to serve the communities that you were aiming to serve, and where you see there's such need among these different communities? So that was really what became the foundation for the clinical, these like clinical aspects and what we build from as we think about our care design and our program design and all of these things that we're now building now that we're actually building a company. And it was really interesting. And Erikka, I wonder if you can relate to this, but like a lot of these folks, I mean, at least half of them, when we were in early conversations with them, were like, look, if I'm going to be on an advisory board and I'm just going to be a check a box or like rubber stamp your initiatives and like that's how you're going to treat this, I don't want in. Like I've done enough of that, and that is not how I want to engage. And I felt terrible, first of all, that like that's the experiences they have had. But I think unfortunately that is sometimes what has happened not only in digital health but also in healthcare more broadly. Like these advisory boards, like sometimes are just, to have diversity of representation, or it's to like say you have these experts who are giving you input, but then you're off building over here and like forgetting about the fact that you need this perspective from these very important people. And so we have actually been very intentional about how we engage with these folks. So yeah, Erikka, I don't know if that like resonates with some of the experience you've had as a clinical leader.
Absolutely. And one thing I will just say, I've been in a lot of different spaces, and it's very rare as a Black woman in leadership to be in a room and seated at the table via Zoom, the Zoom table, where there are so many, it's just diverse, to not be the only Black woman in the space, and to see other people who are just representing other backgrounds and different experiences, and really coming together, being creative and, honoring each other in the seat that we have at the table and honoring the voices that we have. It was just really, really powerful. And that for me was just confirmation that I made the right decision in joining Arise and aligning with them, because they're not just talking the talk, which I'm sure many of us in this space have probably heard the talk, right? In 2020, it's like everybody all of a sudden had a DEI committee, and everyone all of a sudden had all these things, benchmarks that they were putting into place. But I remember when I met with Amanda and Joan, they showed me their initial OKRs for the organization. And it really was to start building the team that reflects, again, the people that we're trying to serve, and, really committing to diversity and starting from scratch. There's so many organizations where it's like, oh, okay, we need to play check, we need to, just get up to date and hire someone so that we're, doing all the things that we should be doing to check a box, essentially. But to me, they were just really intentional about it. And to see this care advisory board at the very beginning was confirmation of that this is intentional, and something that I personally wanted to be down with. I was like, okay, I could be down with this,
I mean, look, like I fully recognize, like, not only am I a white cisgender woman, I am a white cisgender woman in the eating disorder space. And so, of course, like I am grounded in this work because I've lived this experience, but we need all of these perspectives. We need to hear these voices. We need to hear these perspectives. And that is true of the clinical voice. That is also true of the voice of other people who are living with eating disorders or have lived with eating disorders. So yeah, Erikka, this was such an important part of us building the foundation together. And I know too, I think the ways that we're now meaningfully engaging these folks as we are continuing to build is really important too. And Erikka, like, as you are leading kind of our care advisory board meetings, we have one tomorrow. What are some of the things that you think about as we continue to engage and bring those folks along with what we're building?
Well, we've been engaging them from the very beginning, from the design. So one of the things we want to make sure that we're doing at Arise is providing trauma-informed care, patient-centered care, culturally sensitive care. So that's inclusive. So at the very beginning, we have been engaging them in terms of like, how do you all think we should be doing that? What are your ideas? What are your thoughts about providing this level of care? In terms of trainings, we reviewed all of the trainings with them just to get feedback to decide, okay, what areas, what gaps are we missing, ways in which the clinical advisory board can engage with training with us. Even from the very beginning, we decided, we want to make sure that we are delivering like good quality care. So how do we make sure we are tracking that? What outcomes are we measuring? So we were able to consult with the clinical advisory board in terms of identifying what kind of outcome measurement tools we wanted to use at the very beginning and throughout the course of treatment. Just thinking outside the box in terms of we have a couple of members on our board who are really interested in harm reduction, and making sure that we're approaching clinical care in such a way that we're using harm reduction approaches. So just very, again, intentional about how we're using their expertise, and all of them have made themselves very much available to all of us, to the leadership team. And if there's any question that we have, even in, policies and procedures, they are available, and we're seeking out their input and their expertise in those areas. Just to get into this a little bit more, eating disorder care, over the years, I think sometimes it could be really hard because when you think about the folks who are in leadership in those spaces, if you Google eating disorders on Google, you're going to see a representation of what we typically think of as eating disorder treatment. You Google and you'll see that most of the outpatient centers, residential treatment centers, partial hospitalization centers, pretty much all of the folks in leadership are usually white men. And then the therapists and the clinicians and dietitians and everyone else, you're seeing pictures of those teams. They generally are not really diverse. So that's something that, we are trying to make sure that we're doing, is providing culturally competent and sensitive care by training, but also by making sure we're bringing those people on. And then, of course, we really want to make sure that we're providing person-centered care, and we've got folks on our clinical advisory board who are helping us to do that and make sure that we're thinking about that with every decision that we're making clinically. And then, of course, trauma-informed care, because most individuals with eating disorders, probably 60 to 75% of those individuals will at some point have experienced trauma and experience some kind of trauma symptoms. So we can't treat eating disorders in isolation. We have to think about it from a trauma-informed lens, from, thinking about other co-occurring psychiatric conditions like anxiety disorders and depressive disorders. And that's the cool thing about the clinical advisory board. They're all coming in with different levels of expertise, in addition to what I'm bringing to the table and what Amanda and Joan are bringing to the table.
I think it's so interesting, Ari. I think one of the reasons that works so well is just the humility of the folks around the table. I think oftentimes, you see this in startups, see this everywhere, but there's egos that get in the way of like, this is the way that I think that it should be because this is the business decision, or like, this is my perspective because I'm a physician versus, I'm a community care provider. And I have been so continuously amazed by and grateful for the humility with which you lead from a clinical leadership perspective, and with which our care advisory board comes to our virtual table. And every single time it is very much a collective discussion and hearing different perspectives. And they are like, oftentimes they disagree, or there's differences of opinion, or there's, things that we need to talk through, and not operating an echo chamber, having the ability to hold space for that disagreement and think of things differently has been really important. So another thing I would say is, as folks are thinking about how to do this well in digital health, I think that humility and being able to hear the different perspectives and voices and balance those two. So also, this, we can get further into this, but when it comes to building a scalable business in digital health, business cannot be separated from the clinical voice. And oftentimes we've seen that kind of get away from digital health companies. So we really need to have that respect, that mutual respect, and that ability to discuss and have differences of opinions and be able to work through that together. And again, I think humility is a big piece of being able to do that.
Absolutely. And, at the very beginning, I remember Amanda and Joan sharing some of the values, the core values, and listen to lead was one of those values. And that stood out to me because I really do believe in like servant leadership as being a core value of mine. And in order to truly serve, you have to truly listen. You have to be willing to listen to the folks that you are treating. And that's why the clinical voice is so important when you're building a telehealth company like this, because if we're not listening to the folks that we're trying to serve and listening to each other, how are we truly going to impact them in a way that we're hoping to do? So with that being said, Joan, one of the co-founders, she loves data. So one of the things she's constantly doing is putting out surveys for folks, paying folks to do surveys to just get their opinions and to listen, and brings that to the table to say, okay, well, this is what we're getting in terms of feedback, from everything from like clinic design to product design. And I think that's really important and valuable for us to take to the clinical team members and the care advisory board so that we can really make informed decisions. But in order to make an informed decision, you have to listen. It starts with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's so true. And you do this so well as chief medical officer and a clinical leader here, Erikka, because I've seen other places where it's like very top down and it's like, okay, this is what we're doing. This is the clinical decision. Like, here you go, these are the protocols you need to follow. And I have seen you so many times like hold space for our care advocates and our therapists and our dietitians and all of the folks on the team to share what they're seeing, because they're actually working with members and have really important ideas on how to think differently about care or how to problem solve around some like operational roadblock that we're working on. So I think like being able to hear these ideas and opinions from all across the care organization has also really been exciting to see, because I think that's also a big like unique differentiator too for Arise when we think about like being able to build this model that's going to be really impactful. I think that is something that is really, really important.
Wow, thank you. And I think, part of that is wanting to collaborate, right? And when we think about the true relationship between whether you call it a patient or a client or a member, whoever that individual is who is seeking out mental health services, we really want to make sure that it is a collaborative approach and to remove the hierarchy. How many times have you gone to the doctor or have you gone to a therapist and they're making decisions and they're calling the shots and don't really give you a voice in your own healthcare, where you don't feel empowered? I feel like if we really want to model that for the members that we're serving, if we want to model that for the clients, then we have to demonstrate that within our teams on the back end. We have to make sure that we're collaborating with each other and collaborating, with other clinicians and providers. But again, providing that space where people feel empowered to speak up and feel empowered to contribute. Because it really, again, it's mission and vision. I tell folks all the time, this is bigger than us. And if we truly can put together all of our resources, all of our brain energy, our creativity, we could truly come up with something pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. Just wanted to share with folks, like these are kind of the first members of our care teams, including our care advocates, which are our community providers, as well as our clinicians. And, when I look at this page, it just continues to strike me, just the diversity of this group in terms of where they come from, their identity, certainly, but the just breadth of the backgrounds, the experiences they've had in life, the cultural context from which they come, the things that they have lived in the past, are living today. And I think, Erikka, you and I and Joan have talked a lot about how do we really support this team too, and the team as we grow and scale beyond the folks that you see here. And I really appreciate your perspective in making sure that we're supporting these folks on our team first, in addition to supporting our members. And I think that, sharing that perspective with folks would be really helpful.
Absolutely. And I'll have to just, again, when I look at this slide, it almost makes me want to cry because, again, I've been in a lot of different spaces, even in my group private practice. I love my people, I love my folks, but it is just like not as diverse as this team that we're building and bringing on. And it's just been such an honor to work with Joan and Amanda Reagan, who I'm gonna call out a little later. I'm gonna
Yes.
introduce you all to her, who's here today. But the intentionality of, hey, okay, if we're thinking about bringing this therapist on or bringing on this dietitian, what lived experience do they have? What identities are they, bringing to the table, and what ways are they going to really contribute in, in terms of their expertise, and just looking at that person as a complete whole individual and seeing their alignment with the mission and vision. As you can see here, we have a couple of folks with an MPH. We have Lillian Holloway, who's worked, a family medicine doctor who's worked in the prison system and understands the value of bridging medical and mental health together, because you can't isolate the two. So to hear their journeys professionally and how they've gone about their own approach to treating the clients and the patients that they serve, we really wanted to make sure we're pulling people who are again in alignment with the mission and vision of the organization. So that's really important to us during the interview process. And then, of course, we have, care advocates here. The care advocates are individuals who are coming alongside the patients and really providing that community support. So that's another thing that's really important to us, is we're not just treating disorders, right? We're not just treating individuals with eating disorders. We're treating the whole person. And if we're treating the whole person, we have to look at the social determinants of health. We can't ignore them. So what's a way to do that? It's bringing in community support, and that's being led by Jiva Wilkerson, who is the head of our community care program and has really been just amazing at developing our community care program and bringing on some awesome care advocates with different kinds of lived experience, different identities, who are able to walk alongside that patient or member and say, okay, what are some of the barriers that you're experiencing, and how can we help you? How can we, again, walk alongside of you so that you are essentially living your best life? That's what we want all of our patients to do, right? But in order to do that, we have to address all the things that they're facing. Telehealth helps to bring down some of those barriers, right, in terms of transportation. But if you have a mom of 3, and it's a single mom, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to feed their family, well, yeah, that's where our advocates can come into play and think about, okay, how do we address food insecurity in an individual who's also dealing with an eating disorder? Those are things that you might not necessarily think about in a traditional outpatient setting, but things that we're really trying to be intentional about. So with that being said, getting to your original question, I mean, how do we then support these individuals, right? Because as you all know, as therapists and clinicians in the field, this takes a toll on us emotionally and physically when we are serving folks who are just dealing with a lot. And part of it is building a great clinical team where we, in a culture where we take care of one another. So one of the things that Amanda and Joan have implemented is unlimited PTO. Because if you're, if you need to take time for yourself, whether that's physically or mental health wise, we want to make sure that you are able to do those things. So building that culture where people feel like they can, they're having a tough day, if they need to get their needs met, that they're able to do so, and providing a lot of support. We try to meet with each other and have team meetings weekly or multiple times per week via Zoom. We actually just left the party where we painted together, and we had like a paint and sip kind of thing virtually, which was pretty fun. So we try to create, again, a culture where people feel supported, where they feel heard and listened to. But also, we have an amazing operations team, and we could not do the work that we do as clinicians without operations. So this is where Amanda Reagan comes in, who is amazing, because she is bringing a wealth of experience from the operations arena. But as you can see, she's also an LCSW. She is a therapist. So I've worked in spaces where the folks who are leading operations they are just like completely detached from what we do in the clinical world. And I'm sure you all have been in positions where you are sitting with the patient. You're like, now who came up with this procedure? Who in the world came up with this process? Because they clearly have never seen a patient a day in their lives, And I'm really, really grateful that we have built an operations team. So Amanda Reagan and then Asil Khalil, who's our operations specialist, they're coming in with this clinical background, and they get it. They get it. So we're making decisions together as a clinical team to really, again, think about the ways that we can streamline processes and meet the needs of our patients, but also meet the needs of the clinical team so that they have the tools and they have all that they need to do their job and to do it well, and feel that they have the support to do that as well. So
yeah, I mean, that just is so important, and was such an intentional decision that we made, that we really be thinking about the ways that operations and clinical come together. Amazes me, but I remember there was an exec in digital health space, and they said to me that you might want to be careful about having a clinician in an operations leadership role, because that might kind of like muck things up, or they might be thinking too much with the clinical lens. And I was like, that doesn't even make sense. Of course, we would want to have the clinical perspective and put these two things together. And also, how important is that to building trust? Like, I think from the very beginning, like Erikka, you and Amanda worked so seamlessly together because you understood each other's perspectives and really had empathy for that. And I think there was a lot of trust that came from that very early. So, and again, I think this goes back to the point that it is so important as we build care delivery businesses that there not be silos where there's like business and operations over here and clinical over here, but we find ways, and it needs to be in all different ways, that we are putting these together. So yes, of course, it is a care advisory board. Of course, it's having meetings where we're bringing together clinical and business in strategy sessions, but it's also just day to day, like how do we think about operational decisions and the way that impacts care teams. So this team and continuing to build out our care operations function alongside our care delivery organization is really important. And I want to jump us back a couple slides back to that team, because one of the things that I think is really important to call out here too is you started to touch on this a little bit, Erikka, with sharing like Lillian's background in the prison system. I have found one of the most important things as we've been hiring across the team, including our care teams, is really getting to know people and the wealth of expertise and perspective that they bring from having lived in all different ways, all different spaces, come from all different backgrounds. Like there is no substitute for the understanding that comes from living something. So for example, like Jiva, as our head of community care, she's also an eating disorder recovery coach. And that comes out of her own experiences with an eating disorder, which she talks about and brings to our team. So it's a very different thing when you can be in a meeting and say, okay, well, when I went through that, this is how it was for me, and helps a clinician to think differently about, how we think about delivering a care. Well, I'll use an example. Actually, Erikka, you and I were talking about numberless scales. So numberless scales for me, as somebody who has had 15 plus years of living with in eating disorder, fortunately now recovery, was like, oh my gosh, don't put that thing anywhere near me. Like I was immediately triggered as soon as I heard about it. And I was like, okay, I need to step back and think about your perspective, because as a clinician, I can totally understand why you need that information, why you need to be able to see how somebody is actually doing from a medical perspective and make sure that they are safe. And also, it helped to see both sides, because it was like, okay, well, maybe we can think differently about how how do we understand medical necessity? And like, for some people, can we do this? Can we offer another option for some people? Like for me, I'd be more comfortable going to a doctor's office and having them do a blind weight check, as opposed to me having this blind weight scale in my house.
Yeah. No, that was such a good example though of how the blend between individuals with lived experience and then those with experience treating these psychiatric and medical conditions, it really is so important to hear everyone's perspective, because I would have never thought about that. It's like, oh yeah, it'd be easy to have this at home. And she's like, no, that
Don't
is,
put that near me.
yes, that would cause so much anxiety. It's like, oh, of course it would, right? And I think that's what's so valuable about having these co-founders, Amanda and Joan, who have lived experience, are very open with their lived experience and talk about some of the challenges that they experience in seeking healthcare. Even with some of the privilege that they've had, they've still confronted a lot of barriers to accessing good quality eating disorder care, and also not feeling as feeling like they were a part of their own care, feeling as though their care was dictated to them versus really feeling like they were an active participant in their care and actually leading, the direction in which they were receiving their care. So I think having that perspective is just so important. And that's what I think helps to keep us grounded at Arise, is because we do have so many individuals with lived experience, not just Amanda and Joan, but Jiva Wilkerson, some of our care advocates, but also, which is really, really deep to me, is our product team.
Yes.
So we didn't really talk about the product side, but as you all know, because we've all had to work with EHRs and electronic health records and all the things, that part is equally important, not only for our experience as a clinicians, but also for the folks who are coming on board, the folks who are interacting with that technology to engage in their treatment. And it's been phenomenal. I don't know about you all, but I work in many spaces where I never even know who the tech folks are. I just call them like, my computer is broken, I need you to fix it, or I logged out, I need a new password. But they've been so intentional about bridging those two departments, the clinical care team and the product team. There are folks on a product team with lived experience with eating disorders. There are folks who've worked in eating disorder treatment centers who serendipitously have now found themselves working with us, and they get it and they care. So to have, that kind of alignment even amongst the different teams, you get a different perspective, because they are saying, yeah, I remember having to fill out a form and not only having like 3 options in terms of pronouns, or, not really feeling like this is a good representation of any of the symptoms. So I don't feel like this organization gets me, so I have to look elsewhere. So from, the early stages when we're developing, the intake forms and what that looks like and that experience, to make sure that even that process is inclusive. There's intentionality amongst all of those different angles, and then to bring us all together so that we're playing around with the technology and practicing to see, okay, this is probably, I would change this language here or change this language there. It really is so important, I think, to have those different perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, as we continue to build, like building the technology will be a piece of that. And so this co-design process, if you will, where we are finding tangible ways where we have pathways for a care advocate to say, hey, this like nose function really not working for me. Like, can you like figure out a better way for me to be able to share this note with a therapist? Or for a therapist to say like, hey, my member like tried to get me some information, I didn't get the alert, like what's going on? And being able to have a channel for this communication to happen, have a direct line from the people who are building the technology product to those who are using it is just so important. And especially to reduce friction and frustration, which we know is definitely a challenge for those of you who are actually delivering care. Well, we certainly could go on into some more areas, but I'm curious, Jacqueline, if you have any specific questions or if the audience does, otherwise we can share a few other thoughts that we've had as we've been building.
Well, I'm just gonna say that I am so happy to see this. Like, my heart is so happy. I have never seen any eating disorder clinic in my life with like this many different people who are not white. Like, I just have never seen it, and I'm just so excited. And so carry on, keep going. I'm taking it all in, and I'm just
Yeah.
so this is amazing. You all are building something amazing.
Thank
Well,
you. That means so much.
what I've told the clinical team and the care advocates when we did our initial training is that, we are really at the beginning, I think, of something just so unique and really changing the scope of health equity in a way. I think we can truly serve as a model for that, not only in the eating disorder space, but also just in health, period, in the healthcare arena. And
Period, just
period.
period. Overall, I mean, I'm a perinatal mental health specialist, and we don't even see that. Like, we like any place that is healthcare is just, it needs to look like this, a rainbow, an array of people, because that's what's here. I mean, that's what's in our country and around the globe. So yes, I'm with you. Health equity is just, yes, you all are doing, you're gonna solve this thing. This is great.
Thank you. Well, one of the things, and we really have to give kudos to Amanda Squared, I'll call them, Amanda, co-founder, and also Amanda Reagan, um, because we've also partnered with Violet and, part of the training to make sure that we are because yes, we want to recruit folks who are diverse, but we also realize we are all coming into this with our own bias, right? And we have to check that. So it's really important for all of us to get training to learn how to be more culturally sensitive, and again to make sure that we're doing everything through just a lens that of humility, and being really sensitive to that. So we're really excited to be doing that again from the beginning. And that's what to me is so important, is like, this is not an afterthought. We're not saying, okay, like later on down the line, oh yeah, we probably should add that. It's like, okay, how do we make sure from the beginning that we are meeting these needs? So in addition to working alongside with Violet, we also are doing, a really in-depth clinical training and cultural sensitivity training, everything from trauma-informed care, harm reduction, looking at health at every size, and addressing fat phobia and diet culture. Of course, looking at things through an anti-racist approach, and really doing things that are trying to be mindful of weight inclusivity. So Amanda brought up that point about the scale. It's like, okay, yeah, most clinics you go to, everybody immediately goes to the scale, but is that actually necessary? Why do we do that? Let's start questioning, why do we do the things that we do? Are we doing it because it's always been done that way? And if so, how can we approach this in a very fresh and unique way and kind of redesign in some ways some of the elements that we kind of do automatically without being intentional and thinking about, okay, we don't need a weight on every single person. Yes, if they are experiencing some physical symptoms and they're losing weight at a rate in which we need to monitor that, absolutely. But that may not be the case for everyone. And we all know that for a lot of people, and especially for individuals with eating disorders, the scale brings about so much shame and, pain and guilt and trauma, so how can we start to just shift the way that we're providing care and meeting those individuals exactly where they are? So yeah, if we need a waitlist scale and we need to send that, sure, maybe we can figure out a way to do that. Or we send you to somebody, send you to your doc and you get a nursing visit and do a blind weight there. Or we don't need it at all, so how do we train our clinicians in doing that as well as, taking that patient-centered approach. And again, thinking about things from a different perspective, thinking about how we deliver healthcare in another way. That's again really creative, but also still providing a solid standard of care.
See, y'all, this is why it's so important that you find yourself the right chief medical officer. It's so true. Like I think a lot of times you see like, digital health, it can be like, oh, we have this like great idea on the business side. It's going to be so innovative and let's like find the fastest way to go do that. But what we really need is thinking about differently about the care delivery. And so Erikka, your leadership in how do we actually challenge these assumptions? How do we actually think differently about this? I think it's going to lend ourselves to be able to be more impactful in changing what the care actually looks like and how it feels for folks. And the other thing I'll say here too, that I've really appreciated, Erikka, as you've built this training program, is that you're bringing together folks from different perspectives too, to actually deliver this training. So a couple other folks I'll shout out is Deanne Butler, who developed a great DEI training for our entire team in addition to our care teams. We also worked with a group called Safely Connected, led by Cody Esterly, that was really doing the particulars of how you apply all this in the eating disorder space specifically, and facilitated this really important conversation among our clinicians. So it didn't feel like you were just like having to check a box and go through a training module, but it was instead like a live discussion where we all came together, and Joan and I were in it too. We were talking about like these different topic areas and really digging in to try and understand together. And I think that's just going to make the care so much better, because it isn't just surface level, like, okay, check the box, I know how to do this, but it's instead like really deeply understanding and kind of absorbing that, which I think then translates to how you'll actually deliver care. So I just love this training program. And I think the other important thing too is that it's continuous. Like, this is not just like, okay, you come in the door and we're going to train you for a week and then like, good luck. Now you're seeing patients and that's it. But we are continuing to bring together people from the eating disorder community and beyond on an ongoing basis to do different trainings so that we can continue to push the care forward and think differently. So for example, Erikka had mentioned earlier the harm reduction approach. Gloria Lucas is a person in the eating disorder community who's leading a lot of that research and work to bring that into the eating disorder field. And so working with Gloria in order to actually deliver a training on that is something that we would be looking to do, so that we can hear directly from, an expert who is leading that work, and not just relying on, although our team is amazing, not just relying that it's the expertise and knowledge within the team, but we're expanding beyond that too.
And I think that is really important for me too, because I'm constantly learning. I realize that my background, I'm coming from a strictly medical background, right? So it's been awesome to work with folks like Amanda, and, to have Cody's perspective, and some others, because that's also going to inform even, things down to our policies. Are we making sure that our policies are inclusive? Because we can consider referring to a higher level of care, but if that higher level of care might be harmful to someone because they are not providing culturally competent care, or they're not acknowledging someone who is transgender and they're not getting their needs met, then could that cause more harm? And how do we take care of them within our setting, using a harm reduction model? So, there are things that I'm even learning as a physician from some of my colleagues. And it's like, okay, let's think about this creatively. Let's, again, think outside the box. Yes, we are used to doing things a certain way, but let's start to challenge that, because what we know about, especially the treatment of eating disorders, but I would say this is true for most psychiatric conditions. When you look at the research that's been done in those areas, most of the patients in the or research participants are Caucasian. Most of the research studies, especially for eating disorders, are usually in anorexia nervosa, or for people who are already in treatment. So it meant that they would have to have been able to pay for treatment, and even for outpatient treatments, for like FBT, family-based treatments, some of those are, we have to take some of that literature and put it in perspective. It's not to say that we just want to say, okay, no, we're not going to listen to that or pay attention to those research studies, but it's just acknowledging the fact that, yeah, most of the families that participate in FBT in the research studies were well-to-do white families who had access, who had resources. These were not single family households who didn't have it. These were not necessarily, culturally, diverse families, maybe Asian population where, the families may not necessarily understand the eating disorder so how do we apply FBT in those populations if we haven't necessarily studied the effectiveness in those populations, right? So we can't always just broadly generalize that data to other populations. So we, again, have to think, again, outside the box and think about other ways that we're delivering care, even from a therapeutic lens.
I will say too, just to add to that, when we think about, ultimately, of course, we are still building a business. And of course, this is a care delivery organization. And it is also a business that we aim to grow and scale over time. And one of the things I've been really grateful for is, Erikka, like the conversations that we were having as we're talking to health plans and we're talking to health systems and we're talking to others who I think, there's still across many different areas of the healthcare system, like a pretty narrow view of what eating disorders are. And so being able to have that clinical perspective really helping to elucidate all of the things that you just said and really understanding, why do we need to think differently about how care is delivered and what the care actually looks like and how we tailor this to different groups and different communities has just been invaluable. And so, of course, it is so important for all the reasons we've been talking about that we have the clinical voice when it comes to what we're actually building and delivering, and also how we sell it, how we put it out there, how we get adoption from a business model perspective. It's really important that people understand the clinical side of it.
I'm just amazed. We don't have any questions.
And I'm like, where are the questions?
Thank you. I mean, you all laid it out. I mean, this is amazing. We have some great comments. Nia said, truly loving this entire talk. So glad to be here and hear about how Arise is making game-changing steps forward in the eating disorder space. And Serena said, hearing you talk about this is so wonderful since doctors are often so focused on existing literature and not adjusting to all of this. I mean, this is a game changer. This is the blueprint for, like you said, care delivery business models moving forward, especially clinical.
Thank you.
Thank you. It really means a lot to hear that.
Yeah, that's the first time we've had no questions. I think we're all like in shock. Like, this is great.
Oh gosh. Well, any and all go, even if they're just about understanding eating disorders more, if they're about, how we think about like supporting our providers. Oh, this is actually one thing I think we didn't touch on as much is like tangible mental health support for our providers. So Erikka was speaking to this before, but being able to actually, come together and have time together and hold space for people. But I think especially, I was talking to somebody about this last night, in the context of this year and the past few years in particular, like the world keeps throwing stuff at us. And we, even just this week, there were at least a third of our team members who lost or had tough health news about a friend or a family member. And I mean, that stuff's real and it's hard. And we bring that to how we show up at work and have found more and more that we need to actually hold that. Like, it's not enough to just say, oh, we have unlimited PTO, which like, sure, great. That's an awesome startup perk, but actually, how do we actually create space for people when they have, a health thing come up or they have something going on with their family and they need to step away for a few hours? Like, how do we actually create structure and support that is going to meaningfully mean that like that person can go take that time away, and they're going to be supported fully, and we're going to have backup for them. And then when they come back, we're going to hold that transition for them. So anyway, it's just, I think, something else too, of course, as we think about supporting the team, it is certainly about like, what's the product look like and how does it make your job easier? And it's about like, how do we come together and have, meetings and collaboration? And also it's about that real support for folks to prioritize their mental health, their families, their well-being.
And I just want to add to that, because I've definitely worked in spaces where there was no room for that. It's like, okay, you're like a workhorse essentially, and it's all about the number and the data. And the bottom line at the end of the day, it's like, we don't care how it gets done, it just needs to get done, and you need to have X amount of patients and blah, blah, blah. But there's something about this culture that's being created where people so early in the stages, I mean, when we think about it, like it was this month last year that Amanda and Joan met.
Yeah, Joan and I met this week last year. Yeah.
So they met a year ago, right? And to think about like, wow, the team members, whether that's clinical team, community care, the product team, feel open enough and transparent enough and vulnerable enough to say, hey, I have this going on in my family, or I have this going on in my relationship, or whatever. That authenticity that they're able to bring to the workspace allows us to then be able to give, right, more in the work setting, because we're feeling taken care of, right? And then that allows us, if we're being authentic amongst our coworkers, that allows us to truly be, to show up in an authentic way with our patients and our clients. And that's something that one of our therapists, who's on the clinical advisory board, Dr. Jenny Wing Hall, she is very much into like, how do we bring authenticity, to the therapeutic alliance that we have with our patients. And we want to reflect that amongst ourselves so that we can also do it with our patients and our membership.
Yeah. And I think just fundamentally believe that those two things do not need to be mutually exclusive. And yet we've seen them be pretty separated in a lot of digital health. So it's something that we will continuously learn about in terms of ways to actually do this well. And of course, as you scale a team and it becomes much bigger, it becomes even more difficult to do that, but really committing to be able to hold that space. Because as Erikka said, I think, it means that people do want to be here and are more engaged, which is, just certainly not the point of why we do it, but it's certainly, when we think about building a business, is an important piece to think about too. So I think that both of those things can be true. We can build a really great, sustainable and scalable business while also all of us prioritizing our own mental health and well-being. And I believe that so strongly personally, because it's not all that long ago that I was in a really, really difficult place with an eating disorder and depression. And I know that my health, my well-being and continued recovery is the thing that is going to need to come first, or else I can't build this business. So I think that's true for everybody. Everybody should have the space to be able to heal and continue to heal and to have space for themselves. So that's my PSA for everybody to do more of that.
I love it.
That was amazing. It was a great way to like wrap us up. Like that's
That was
well, thank you, Jacqueline, so much for having us. This is really a pleasure to get to be together tonight. And thank you to everybody who joined us.
Thank you.
Thank you.